You ever feel that chill crawl up your spine when you realize something is not what it seems? Imagine standing on a piece of land your family has held for generations, a land soaked with the sweat, the prayers, and the history of your ancestors, only to look up one day and see 156 brand new homes towering where your family's fields once breathed. And then imagine being told, it doesn't belong to you anymore. Would you fight back? Or would you crumble under the weight of power, money, and the iron hand of an HOA? Hold on to that thought, because this story is not what you think it is. In fact, it's far stranger, far heavier, and far more satisfying than you can possibly imagine. Watch until the very end, because the twist hidden deep inside this family's history will shake you. The story begins with a black family whose roots on their land ran back over a century. They weren't just living there, they were thriving there. This wasn't just dirt and grass, it was legacy. Their great-grandfather, a man born with nothing but grit and a vision, purchased that land when the odds were stacked against him. At a time when owning property wasn't just rare for a black man, it was nearly impossible. He secured it. Then he passed it down with a promise. Protect this land. Never let it go. No matter how many times they try to take it from you. Stand. Those words would echo for generations. Fast forward to modern day, and what do you see? Gleaming houses, manicured lawns, HOA boards, and families who have no clue of the soil beneath their feet. A developer swooped in, convinced they had a legal right, convinced that money and paperwork outweighed memory, blood, and sweat. They put up 156 homes. They sold them. They told families moving in, this is your sanctuary now. But the truth was brewing underneath, waiting for the moment to rise up. Pause right there.
I'll think about it.
How many times in history have voices been silenced, families erased, and legacies paved over with concrete and contracts? But this story, this family didn't just roll over. They had something that would stop the HOA in its tracks. And the way it unraveled, oh, you won't want to miss that. So don't go anywhere, because every twist pulls you deeper into the truth of what really happened. Now here's where things get messy. The HOA thought they had it all under control, weren't just running the neighborhood, were dictating everything from paint colors to fence heights. But beneath their arrogance, they never realized they were building on land that was never theirs to begin with. They sent notices, fines, and threats, as HOAs do. But when they turned their eyes toward the rightful heirs, they didn't realize. The trap was already set. Let's rewind. Over 100 years ago, that great-grandfather, the man who planted the seed of legacy, did something unthinkable. He knew the climate he was living in. He knew how easily land could be stolen, how quickly rights could vanish. So he wrote something into the deed, something hidden, clause, a stipulation that future generations barely even talked about because it was their secret weapon. And it lay there, untouched, like a ticking time bomb, waiting for exactly this moment. Picture this. The HOA throws a lawsuit at the family. They're smug. They believe they'll crush them, bury them in legal fees, until they surrender. But when the family walked into that courtroom, they didn't come with fear in their eyes. They came with confidence. Because clutched in their hands was that century-old deed. And when it was read aloud, the room went silent. Here's the part that shocks everyone. The land could never be sold, never be transferred, never be divided. Not without the family's explicit consent. And any development made on the land without that consent automatically reverted ownership back to the heirs. Do you feel that? That chill down your arms? That's the sound of 156 homes suddenly, standing on land that didn't belong to the HOA, or to the developers, or to the homeowners. It belonged to the family, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because while this sounds like a clean victory, the battle that followed was anything but easy. Imagine the chaos. Homeowners panicking, wondering if the houses they bought were even theirs. An HOA scrambling, trying to twist reality, trying to gaslight everyone into believing it wasn't true. But the law was ironclad, because that great-grandfather thought 100 years ahead. He thought about the tricks, the theft, the greed, and he left his family a shield strong enough to shatter all of it. Now here's the emotional punch. Imagine being a descendant, sitting there and realizing your ancestor loved you so much, trusted you so much, that he protected you 100 years before you were even born. That's not just land. That's love made permanent. That's family reaching through time to say, I've got you. If that doesn't make your chest tighten, I don't know what will. But wait, this is where the story throws another curveball. Because you'd think, after such a revelation, everything would just fall into place. But no, the HOA wasn't about to bow out gracefully. They doubled down. They tried intimidation. They tried slander. They told homeowners not to worry, that the family was just greedy, just troublemakers. They painted them as villains, even though they were standing on the truth. And isn't that the way it always goes? When you fight for what's yours, suddenly you're the problem. Suddenly you're the enemy. Yet every time the HOA pushed, the family pulled out another piece of truth. Old newspaper clippings, court records from the past, testimonies that revealed how many times people had tried to steal this land before. Each time, the family stood. Each time, they won. And now, in the 21st century, their greatest battle became their greatest victory. Think about the irony. 156 families thought they were safe because of contracts and HOAs, but contracts crumble in the face of truth written 100 years earlier. You can buy a house, but you can't buy stolen land. And every time the judge slammed that gavel, the HOA's power shrank smaller, till it disappeared entirely. Let me pause here and ask you, what would you have done? If it was your family, would you have had the strength to stand? Or would the pressure have broken you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I need to know how you feel about this. Trust me, you'll want to stick around, because this story is just getting started. And here's something even crazier. That hidden deed clause. It wasn't the only trap. There were more. Layers of protection buried in the paperwork, like a maze designed to catch anyone who dared try. I thought they were clever, but they were walking into a snare that had been waiting a century. Imagine the patience of that. Imagine the foresight. And now, as the dust settled, the homeowners had to face a truth that rattled them to their core. The houses they thought they owned, the lawns they thought they controlled with their HOA meetings, were built on a lie. Some left in anger, some in fear, and some turned to the family and begged for forgiveness. The tables had turned completely. This isn't just about land. This is about resilience. It's about a people who refuse to be erased. About how love and foresight carved a future no amount of greed could erase. And the deeper you go into this story, the more you'll see it's not just the family who won. It's a lesson for all of us. When you protect your legacy, you protect your future. So let me rehook you right here. You think you've heard the best part? Not even close. Because what happened next, after the courtroom, after the HOA's collapse, is something that stunned even the family. And you'll want to hold on tight, because the next turn is jaw-dropping. Stay with me, because you don't want to miss what comes after this. Have you ever thought a victory was final, only to realize it was just the beginning of an even greater storm? That's exactly where this family found themselves. It stood in that courtroom, heard the silence fall heavy as the deed was. Reed felt the weight of history break free from their ancestors' words, and for a moment, there was triumph. For a moment, it felt like justice had finally kissed their hands. Life doesn't let victories come so easily, especially when money and power are threatened. And the HOA? Oh, they weren't done yet. In fact, what came next would test the family in ways they never imagined. If you thought part one was shocking, wait until you hear this. Because this is where the trap snapped shut even tighter. The days after the courtroom win should have been sweet, right? Families celebrating relief washing over them. And instead, chaos ruled. Picture the homeowners, 156 of them, standing outside their houses. Their eyes darting between each other, whispers turning into shouts. Some were furious at the HOA. Some demanded refunds from developers, and others turned their anger on the rightful heirs. The family who dared to fight back. That's the cruelest twist of it all. When you're right, when you're standing on truth, people will still find a way to paint you as the villain. And the HOA, wounded but not broken, fanned those flames. They called meetings. They sent emails. They spread lies about the family. They don't care about you, they whispered. To the homeowners, they just want to steal your homes. They want to ruin everything you've built here. The irony. Everything the HOA claimed was theirs had been stolen in the first place. But fear is powerful. Fear makes people believe the wrong voices. And soon enough, the family found themselves walking through grocery stores, through town streets, feeling eyes burn into them, hearing mutters under breath. They were being treated as outsiders, even though they were the only true insiders left. Here's where it gets heavy. The family's youngest heir, a girl no older than 17, found herself facing classmates who sneered at her, repeating the HOA's venom. She came home one night with tears in her eyes, and her father, who had carried the fight into the courtroom, looked at her and said, "This is exactly why we fight, so you'll never have to bow to lies." Can you feel that? The sting of injustice mixing with the fire of defiance. That's the kind of pain that either breaks you or forges you stronger than steel. But remember that clause in the deed? That wasn't the only trap left behind. The great-grandfather hadn't just protected the land with words, he had placed layers upon layers of legal snares, each designed to trigger if anyone tried to bypass the family's rights. And one of those snares was about to spring. Because while the HOA scrambled to hold on, the developers who had sold the homes realized they might be on the hook for millions. They wanted someone else to take the blame. And when greedy men turn on each other, that's when the truth finally cracks open. The developers accused the HOA of negligence, knowing the deed existed but ignoring it. Desperate. Threw the developers under the bus, saying they were tricked too. Meanwhile, the homeowners filed lawsuits of their own, trying to claw back money they had sunk into mortgages. Can you picture that courtroom chaos? Papers flying, lawyers shouting, judges slamming gavels just to restore order. And sitting quietly in the middle of all this madness was the family. Calm, silent, watching the storm destroy itself around them, because they knew the land wasn't going anywhere. It was theirs, and no amount of finger-pointing could erase that truth. But victory came with a price. Every day the family's name was dragged through the mud. News stations showed angry homeowners crying into cameras, blaming them for ruining their lives. The HOA doubled down on its smear campaign, and even local officials got pulled in, pressuring the family to be reasonable. Reasonable? To give up the very thing their ancestor had bled for? To erase a century of protection just to ease the discomfort of those who had turned a blind eye? No, they weren't going to bend. And that refusal lit a fire that burned hotter every day. Let me ask you, if you were in their shoes, could you have endured it? Could you stand tall while hundreds of people painted you as a monster? Or would you have folded just to make the noise stop? That's the kind of soul-deep question this story forces on us. Because strength isn't proven when everyone cheers for you. It's proven when everyone boos, and you still refuse to move. Then came the breaking point. The HOA, cornered and desperate, tried one last gambit. They sent out a letter to every homeowner, declaring they would not recognize the family's ownership. They claimed the deed was fraudulent, outdated, irrelevant. And then they hired private security. Imagine that. Uniformed men, patrolling a neighborhood built on stolen land, trying to keep the rightful heirs off their own property. That image alone is enough to make your blood boil. But here's where the trap truly closed. See, that original deed didn't just protect the land, it also included penalties. Yes, penalties. If the land was developed without consent, any profits made would be owed directly to the heirs. Think about that. Every single home sold, every dollar pocketed was now legally tied to the family. And when their lawyers filed the paperwork, the HOA's whole world collapsed. Not only did they not own the land, they owed the family millions. Millions? The homeowners? Panic turned to despair. Some begged the family to let them stay. Others turned angrier than ever. Through it all, the heirs stood firm. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about showing that foresight, legacy, and love could outlast a century of greed. Let's pause here. Feel the weight of this moment. A black man 100 years ago, living in a world stacked against him, somehow had the clarity to see all this coming. He knew they'd try to steal. He knew they'd try to erase. And so he set a trap that would spring long after he was gone, protecting descendants he would never meet. That's not just brilliance, that's generational love carved into stone. That's one man telling the future, I see you. I won't let them take you. But here's where the story takes another twist. Because just when you think the HOA is finished, when you think the family has secured victory once and for all, something even bigger begins to stir. Something no one, not the family, not the developers, not the homeowners, could have seen coming. And it has the power to turn everything upside down again. Stay with me, because this next chapter is going to blow your mind. And before we step into it, I want you to drop your thoughts below. Was the family right to hold strong, even while hundreds turned against them? Or should they have compromised for peace? I want to hear your heart on this, because the ending of this story is about to test every belief you've ever had about justice, legacy, and love. You ever noticed how just when you think a storm is over, the clouds roll back in darker than before? That's exactly what happened here. Family had revealed the hidden deed, exposed the HOA's lies, shaken the developers to their core, and even forced the courts to acknowledge what was theirs. By all logic, it should have been over. But greed never dies quietly. And when 156 homes, millions of dollars, and the reputation of powerful people are on the line, wow, you better believe they will claw, bite, and scrape to hold on to what doesn't belong to them. What came next wasn't just a legal fight, it was a war for truth, and it tested the very soul of this family. Stay with me, because the ending of this story will leave you speechless. It began with whispers of appeals. The HOA, beaten in court, refused to let go. They funded attorneys, rallied homeowners, and dug into every corner of the law searching for a crack. Meanwhile, the developers lobbied politicians, trying to rewrite zoning laws, trying to bend reality itself, and the homeowners. Many were trapped in mortgages they could no longer escape, furious and desperate. Some threatening violence against the very family who held the rightful deed. Imagine waking up to see angry signs planted in your yard, to find hateful letters stuffed in your mailbox. That's the kind of pressure that could break anyone. But the family held their ground, because this was bigger than intimidation. It was about honoring the promise their ancestor made. And here's where fate twisted the knife. A storm, literal, not metaphorical, swept through the neighborhood. Winds tore at the homes, rain flooded streets, and in the chaos, the weaknesses of the hastily built houses were exposed. Roofs collapsed, basements drowned, and suddenly, those dream homes the HOA bragged about looked more like traps than sanctuaries. The family stood on their land watching, realizing that once again, the soil their ancestor had protected had withstood what false hands could not. It was a sign, almost divine. The truth always endures when lies crumble. But even that wasn't enough to silence the HOA. They doubled down, filing injunctions, trying to tie the family up in endless legal knots. Yet every time they tried, the family's lawyers countered with the ironclad language of the deed. Then came the reveal that truly ended it. Buried in old county archives, a notarized addendum was found. Signed, sealed, and witnessed a century ago. It declared that any attempts to develop the land without consent wouldn't just revert ownership. It would trigger fines to be collected from the offending parties, compounding annually. Do you understand what that means? The HOA and developers didn't just owe millions. They owed generations of debt. 100 years' worth of compounded penalties? Numbers so staggering, the court gasped when they were read aloud. Now imagine sitting in that courtroom, watching the HOA president's face drain of color, watching the developer's lawyers stammer, watching homeowners cry out in disbelief. The trap was complete. That great-grandfather had reached through time and slammed the door shut so hard it shook the present. The family didn't just own the land. They owned the story, owned the victory, or no one could take it back. But here's the emotional heartbeat of it all. After the dust settled, after the final ruling, after the HOA dissolved under the HOA dissolved under the HOA's weight of its own corruption, the family didn't gloat. They didn't strut. They walked quietly through the neighborhood, now eerily empty, and they prayed. They prayed in gratitude to the ancestor who had shielded them. They prayed for the infested strength to carry the legacy forward, and they prayed for those who had hated them, those who had tried to destroy them because bitterness was not their inheritance. Love was one of the heirs, standing in the center of what used to be a bustling cul-de-sac, placed his hand on the soil and whispered, "We didn't just win land, we won proof that they couldn't erase us." That's what this story is really about. Not houses, not HOAs, not money. It's about endurance. It's about legacy. It's about love that travels 100 years through bloodlines and refuses to die. And here's the twist you never expected. Instead of selling the land, instead of chasing profit, the family decided to build something entirely different. Not another subdivision, not another monument to greed. They created a community center, a place for history, for education, for children to know their worth, for families to gather and remember. They planted trees where fences once stood, raised plaques telling the story of their great-grandfather's vision. They turned the land into a living reminder that resilience beats oppression every single time. So here's my question to you. What would you have done? Could you have carried the weight of 100 years of struggle on your back? Could you have stood tall when the world wanted to tear you down? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I want to hear your heart. Was the family right to hold every inch of their land? Or should they have compromised with those who wronged them? And as you think about it, let this truth sink in. This isn't just a story about one family. This is a story about all of us. About what it means to fight for what's right. About how far love can reach. About how traps set in wisdom can outlast greed 100 years later. Remember this. Justice may take time, but when it arrives, it cannot be denied. If you've been with me through this entire journey, thank you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard, remembered, and passed down. And tell me, how was this video for you? Did it stir something inside? Did it remind you of your own family's fight? Your own ancestors' strength? Let's talk in the comments, because legacy doesn't die as long as we keep speaking it.